Hey church, Pastor Shane here, another community group discussion starter video. We're almost at the end of the book of Judges. We've got one more message after this one, and this week we were in what is the beginning of a two-part epilogue section of the book of Judges. So in the book of Judges, we had this opening section, the first couple chapters, kind of explaining what the situation was, the problem that had started to develop among the Israelites where they weren't kind of following through, that God's ways weren't being passed down to the next generation. So they weren't trusting in God for just in his personhood or for their lives. And then we had a section where they were stuck in that Judges cycle that we talked so much about, of disobeying, there being a disaster, them crying out, and then God raising up a judge or a tribal leader, a deliverer for them, but that they would fall back in disobedience again. And so these last two sections of the book is kind of like an epilogue to the story. And actually scholars debate whether it is in chronological order or not. There's several indications, like the Danites that were in our story this week, with the priest who is a descendant of Moses, that makes this question, did this happen much earlier in the book, closer to the very beginning of the book than maybe closer to Samson in the end of the book? Or is there really a desire to demonstrate in the book a straight chronological series? Either way, the lesson is the same, but it is kind of interesting if you imagine, I could see this happening earlier in the story, earlier as the problem was developing among the Israelites, because this is an internal problem, not an external problem. And this epilogue gets split into two sections. The one we talked about this week, which is about the kind of, as it sums up the problem that is among the Israelites, that in those days there was no king in Israel and everyone did what was right in their own eyes. This first section looks at the spiritual consequences for that, and the next section kind of looks at the civil consequences for that. Among the spiritual consequences of that, we see the story of Micah, who's basically making his own version of God. He's claiming Yahweh, but he makes idols and his own, kind of sets up his own cultic spot in his neighborhood, in his house, rather than going to the tabernacle, which is in Shiloh, the place where they're supposed to be going to worship God. We find the Danites, who have kind of abandoned God's plan for them to take the inheritance that God gave them, instead find this other place which they're not supposed to be attacking. And really everyone defining for themselves who God is and what his ways are. And what we find is we can't really do that. Like there is a temptation among us to kind of define God for ourselves, either because it might bring us comfort to do that, or because we desire something from God. And so if we think of him in a certain way, we end up accidentally or on purpose redesigning him in our head. But the consequence is we're left with nothing. If we create a false version of God in our head, we're going to be left with nothing. There's no power in that. There's no spiritual energy that God could give us. We're trusting in something else other than him. And so it leaves us empty and without anything. And so my encouragement throughout the message is not only a warning to not try to create our own gods or man-made religion, but rather for us to seek God in all the things that we are to do, to seek him out, to spend a lifetime of learning about him, and then, only then, when we kind of humbly approach him and try to let him define himself as he's revealed through the scriptures, do we find the God we need, our creator. And it's an attitude in a lifelong pursuit. And so that's what you're going to be talking about today, that temptation to kind of make one's own image of God in their head, what we do about that, and really just reflect on the goodness of God, that he would reveal ourselves to us and what it looks like for us to spend a lifetime seeking him, understanding his true character. I hope you have a great discussion.